With this video, I'm going to continue where I left off with the first video that looked at a focus study called Our Own and Others Spaces. Again, the purpose of these two videos is to provide you with examples of each of the components that are required of your focus studies. The first video presented the introduction to the focus study on spaces. I talked about and gave you some examples of the kinds of things you'd include in the portion of the focus study devoted to the significance of the topic. And I defined and provided examples of essential questions and initiating experiences for that focus study on spaces. In this video, I'll define and provide examples of devices for learning and sharing, learning center invitations, shared reading engagements, engagement with conceptually related texts and media, informal assessments, and culminating experiences and celebrations. Before I go on, though, I want to point out that modules 8, 9, and 10, and 11 were specifically or are specifically designed to give you ideas for your focus study. From the Maniac McGee module, I specifically wanted you to think about having students explore a story by answering critical questions about it in small groups, and by inviting students to get to know the author of a story and think about the story in terms of the author's life and experiences. By the way, please don't ask your students to come up with their own critical questions. I asked you to do that in your roles as teachers, not as readers. Now, that's not to say that children shouldn't be encouraged to ask and begin discussions around their own questions. It just means that teachers typically don't teach and assess children on their abilities to write critical questions. Also, please be sure to look carefully at Chapter 10 of your Teaching Children's Literature book. If as you work on your focus study, you're not using and revising ideas from that chapter, entitled Literature Response Strategies for your own focus study, you're doing probably more work on this project than you need to. And finally, there's a great website called Read, Write, Think, which you'll find at www.readwritethink.org, which has a lot of really good activities on it. Okay, so let's start where we left off for the focus study on spaces. Devices for learning and sharing are devices that are used regularly by students for collecting, gathering, and organizing their ideas about what they've done and what they've learned so far in their focus study. These devices or tools provide a way for students to keep track of their ideas. Students can use these devices independently or in small or large groups. It's actually nice to include some that include both independent and small group work. For your focus study, you'll need to describe 3 of these that might be used at various points in your study. Log and journal entries are personal and exploratory, and this is an example of a device that's used independently, although students can and should be encouraged to share their writing with others. They shouldn't be required to, however. For the focus study on spaces, the teacher may invite students at the end of each day to write their thoughts and feelings about their experiences during the day of the focus study about spaces. Log or journal entries help students record experiences, discover what they already know, what they don't know, and what they didn't know, and reflect on class experiences. They may also share their entries in pairs or small groups to extend their understanding and engage in some meaningful discussions. A learning wall is an example of a collaborative device where students work with other students to decide how and what to include. As a class or in small groups, students construct an audit trail on their learning wall, or a visual representation of the significant experiences during the focus study and how later inquiries grew from earlier ones. Learning Center invitations are open-ended learning activities that are designed to help children explore the essential questions in creative ways. The invitations provide students with opportunities to make meaning using a variety of sign systems, so for example with art or music, drama, dance, even mathematics. For the focus study on spaces, students might be invited to construct a 3-dimensional model called a diorama of their own special places, whether they're real or imagined. This may include a written description to share with the class. They may also want to recreate the special places that have been described in the books they're reading. The models can go in your museum portion of the classroom. Learning centers often focus on specific books, poems, videos, or pictures. Another learning center for the focus study on spaces might involve the book Fly Away Home by Eve Bunting. This is a book about a homeless boy and his father who live in an airport and use the spaces within an airport to create a home for themselves. For this learning center, you'd want to have multiple copies of Fly Away Home to read at the center. You'd also want to have lots of writing and art materials available. And keep in mind that learning centers are not teacher-led. These are all independent. Students are working independently. Invite students to create representations of their inner feelings of the characters in Fly Away Home. You might give students the option to write I am poems, create collages, or use drama to represent the feelings and emotions the characters experience because of living in the airport. I am poems are described on the Read, Write, Think website. Students should be invited to share the representations that they create with a friend or with groups of friends. During shared reading engagements, different sized groups meet, read, and then delve into the significant meaning of a single text. This should include critical analysis of issues presented in that book. One example of shared reading engagement for the focus study on spaces might be this. Children meet in small groups for discussions of a piece of literature they have chosen from a list you've provided. Then they engage in literature circle discussions about that book. So for shorter books, students might only engage in 1 or 2 literature circles about the book on 1 or 2 different days. For longer books, they might meet several times over the course of the focus study, so that might be the only book that they read. Literature circles are open-ended and take the direction suggested by the members' responses and questions. So these are student-led rather than being structured by the teacher. At the end of each literature circle meeting, group members review and reflect on ideas and topics they shared and make an agreement to meet again as needed. Titles for literature circles that might be suggested to students in the focus study on spaces include Fly Away Home, Evan's Corner, Pumpkins, Amelia's Road, and Your Own Best Secret Place. Of course, books should be selected based on students' ages and reading levels. Another example of shared reading engagements is called a shared novel. The difference between a literature circle and a shared novel is that for a shared novel, the book is selected by the teacher and is read as a read aloud to the class. So you might do this if you don't have a lot of copies of books, or if you have a huge range of readers in your class, and for a number of reasons, it would be better for you to read a book while students are following along. The War with Grandpa is a book that would be appropriate for the focus study on spaces. This is a book about a 10-year-old boy and his grandfather. When the boy finds out that his newly widowed grandfather is coming to live with the family, he's glad because he really likes his grandfather. However, when he discovers that the plan is for his grandfather to take the room that he's had all his life, he's really not so happy. And at the urging of his 2 best friends, the boy declares war on his grandfather to recover his room. So as with literature circles, shared novel engagements occur over time at different places in the book. So, and again, typically these are done in small groups. They're not teacher-led, although I'm going to give you an example here of one that is teacher-led. But typically these shared reading engagements, the engagements actually themselves happen in small groups. So you could create a shared novel experience for students before they begin reading The War with Grandpa. So a teacher might ask students how they would feel if somehow their special place was taken away from them, or if they couldn't go there anymore. And the teacher could record ideas on a piece of poster paper that could be saved so that the class could return to it later on, and so that it could act as an audit trail for the focus study. And if some of the students had an experience where their special place was taken away from them, they might share what happened and how they felt and what they did about it. So that's an example of a large group shared novel experience. And again, they typically aren't teacher-led. They're teacher-designed, but not teacher-led. Other experiences that might be planned around the same book might invite students to work in small groups. So, for example, after reading chapters 1 through 3 aloud, the teacher might ask students to work in small groups to discuss how the boy feels about the grandpa taking over his room and what they think the boy should do about it. And then groups could create skits to act this out for their classmates. Engagements with conceptually related texts and media are those that include multiple and varied sources of information, like books or magazines, newspapers and videos and TV clips that provide alternate perspectives and create opportunities for really complex connections. So during the focus study on spaces, the teacher and students might gather newspaper reports or magazine articles, video segments, even local government printed materials to learn more about the homeless situation, about shelters, and about soup kitchens in the community. Students could be invited to create their own posters or even a newspaper that reports on their findings, on what they learned. Another idea for the focus study on spaces for an engagement with conceptually related texts and media is for the teacher to create multiple conceptually related text sets prior to beginning the focus study for students that are designed for students and that are just put in the class library or someplace. And then these would include things like articles and songs and news clips and books and things like that. For the focus study on spaces, there might be a text set that focuses on the problems of human overpopulation, or another one might focus on an environmental space problem like the overpopulation with animals like deer, like we have in Indiana, or the problems of deforestation, problems of not having enough space for trash, particularly for plastics, which are not biodegradable. Students could pick a text set that interests them and then work in groups to find out more about that topic and make a group presentation to the rest of the class. And as part of their presentation, they could talk about connections between the different materials that they used, the different pieces of the text sets. Assessment description. So as part of your focus study, you want to describe 3 ways that you will informally assess student learning and growth during the focus study. Now remember that informal assessments, these are not scored, they're not graded. So you're going to be informally assessing students by reading their work, listening to them work in their groups throughout the focus study, watching their skits and presentations, and watching them do everything throughout the focus study. But the informal assessments that you include in this section of your focus study should be for assessment purposes only. So it should be specifically designed for you to learn how they're thinking about things. So quick writes are one of the greatest ways to do this, one of the quickest and easiest ways, and they give you really nice information too. They usually involve giving students a prompt, and I'm not actually giving you a specific example this time for the spaces unit, but you'd want to give the specific prompt if you were going to use a quick write in your own focus study. So you'd give students a prompt and ask them to write for anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes in response to that prompt. Student responses usually show what they do or do not understand about the topic, and they can provide the teacher with insights into sort of the reasoning processes the students are using. And don't forget, these are never graded. And then there are graphic organizers, or another really nice way to do informal assessment. Graphic organizers include things like Venn diagrams, spider maps, word or idea webs or concept maps, cause-effect charts, flow charts, sequence charts, and these are all great ways to get students, especially in pairs or small groups, to just sort of present the way they're thinking about something. Of course, you'd want to choose the graphic organizer that matches the ideas that you're hoping to elicit from students. And finally, culminating experiences and celebrations. These are activities that help kids pull together their current understandings about the focus study topic and celebrate what they've learned throughout the focus study and all their accomplishments. So for the focus study on spaces, a teacher might invite individual or small groups to celebrate by performing something they did during the focus study. They might present a reader's theater, choral reading, a skit or a play, a song or a rap, which is always fun. The teachers would want to invite guests such as parents, other classes, school staff, the principal, to the class performance. And then student subcommittees could plan the order of the program create the invitations, arrange for refreshments, and all of those things. Put the onus on the kids. And then finally, another culminating experience might be to create a class quilt. So on a small piece of paper, students would think about the most significant part of the study for them. Students would then be invited to create colorful illustrations, share their illustrations in small groups, and then create a class quilt by gluing pieces on colored butcher paper together, leaving about an inch or so between the squares. So there are some examples of the different pieces of a focus study, and as questions arise, just send them my way.